Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to our /PettyRevenge, where people get little wins on others, and the stories are super satisfying. And in today's episode, it's quite the lineup, guys. We've got Karen friends, bad neighbors, food thieves, package thieves, horrible bosses, all getting taught lessons they won't ever forget. So sit back, relax, take notes, and enjoy the ride. And seriously, try not to smile too hard today. So my wife's friend got married a couple of years back. She made it this 3-day-long event with multiple meals and 2 ceremonies, everything with different dress codes. Day number 1 was some dinner that started at 9 p.m. and took 3 hours, which she then forced everyone to go dancing afterwards. We joined for the meal, but it being on a weekday, we told her we couldn't go dancing. The next day, at her brunch, she tells us how much fun they had dancing, and how even old people and children went. I just brushed it off and smiled. Then, 2 different ceremonies happened that day, and finally, the event will end with another brunch on the 3rd day. By this point, we're so exhausted because we're not party people. We just wanted to be nice and participate. So the morning before the brunch, we get up early, get into our 4th outfit of her event, and my wife does her hair and makeup again for the 4th time, and we go to this brunch. When we get there, my wife's friend greets us, and she says, "Oh, hi, babe. Wow, you look, comfy." She said this with a judgmental tone in her voice, as if to say my wife wasn't trying hard enough, which was BS. My wife tries her best to brush the event off, and she says it's just stress from the wedding that made her terrible towards us the entire time. But I've decided that her friend is just an a-hole and will slowly repay her for years. Since then, at various gatherings, I've given her the following, quote, compliments. I would say something like, "I love how you don't care about vanity, just go with that natural look, and who cares what people think?" Or, "You look super comfy." And I've said variations of this one several times. I've also said to her, "I wish I could have your attitude with arriving whenever, but I always have to show up on time for things." So on and so forth. You get the gist. The greatest part is you can always see the gears turning as she tries to figure out if I'm being complimentary or not. And the thing is, I'll continue doing this until this person is no longer in our lives, or one of us dies. Listen, huge props to OP for doing this on behalf of his wife, and I think many will agree when I say that OP's wife married well. And I also love the fact that OP mentioned that wife's friend never knows if it's a compliment or not. And the top comment of this post says, some other compliments to consider for the future are, number 1, not everyone can pull off that kind of look, but you certainly tried. Number 2, your haircut really slims your face. Number 3, your house feels so lived in. Number 4, you're so charming when you make an effort. Number 5, I wish I was as comfortable as you are wearing that outfit. And lastly, I love how you just don't care what anyone thinks of you. How fun. I envy your courage. And my personal favorite, guys, is this one. This person writes, "I never get tired of seeing that outfit." Some people are so savage, I tell you. And this next OP deals with a literal boundary-crossing neighbor. Listen to this one. Okay, so this is a bit of a long one, but I do need to get it off my chest. I live in a small cul-de-sac, nothing fancy, just your average neighborhood. My driveway fits 2 cars, mine and my husband's, perfectly fine. And for the most part, everybody here minds their own business, except for my neighbor who we'll call Jack. For whatever reason, this guy thinks that my driveway is like extra parking for his family and friends. The first time it happened, I thought it was a mistake. His brother's car was there, and he said it would just be a second. A week later, it was some friend of his dropping something off. Now, I didn't love it, but I figured, whatever, not worth making it awkward. But it kept happening. I would come home from work, and I'm a nurse, so some days I'm wiped out, and there's a random car blocking me on the driveway. One night, I literally had to park halfway down the street and carry 5 bags of groceries because his buddy's truck was in my spot. Every time I'd say something, he would do that stupid half smile and he would go, "Oh, yeah, sorry, they'll be gone soon, trust me." Like I'm the one being difficult. And here's the final straw. I get home late Friday night after a 12-hour shift. I'm still in scrubs, I'm starving with takeout that's getting cold in the passenger seat, and boom, there's a nice white giant SUV parked dead center in my driveway. The thing's not even off to the side, like it's full on blocking me from even pulling in. I knock on his door, no answer. I call Jack and finally he picks up. And super casual, he goes, "Oh yeah, that's my in-laws. They'll only be here a couple of hours. Just park on the street, it's not a big deal." And that was it for me. Cue my petty revenge. I called a tow truck, and yes, where I live, if someone blocks your private driveway, you're allowed to tow immediately. The tow guy shows up in 20 minutes. The SUV was gone before I finished half of my fries. About an hour later, there's furious pounding on my door. Jack's beet red, his in-laws are yelling in the background, and he's going off how I didn't have to take it that far. To which I just said to him, "You told me it wasn't a big deal, so I treated it like it wasn't a big deal." I then closed the door in his face. They had to pay almost $300 to get their car back. And funny enough, ever since then, my driveway stayed crystal clear, not even for, quote, just a sec. So I work as a night auditor at a hotel. A few weeks back, when we were completely booked, this one guest complained about the smell of weed coming from a room. I asked them which room do they think it's coming out of, and they tell me. So I of course go up to the room and knock on the door. It's a group of like 8 or 9 people, and I tell them that somebody reported the smell of it and asked if they had it. And I do want to note that the room did not smell strongly of it, but it's clear that they had been smoking before entering the hotel. They assured me they didn't, and I left it at that. I can't just ask to search the room, and they were keeping quiet, so I just apologized and left. About 10 minutes later, the same guest calls down to complain, except this time, he says to me, "I know you probably can't call the cops, but I can if you want." I just say to him, "No sir, I don't need you to call the cops on that guest, I will check on them again." He then says to me, "I can do it though, just let me know." And honestly, this time, I just do a walk-by of the room. I still can't smell anything, and in my hotel, you can smell smoke as soon as you step off the elevator. So I go back down, and I'm chilling, watching Daredevil Season 3, when this one guest walks into the lobby. I ask, "Do you need anything, sir?" He says, "No, I'm just waiting on somebody," and I recognized his voice as the guest who had been calling down. About 20 minutes go by, and one of my city's finest, whom I know because he's been here for other problems before, walks in, and he says he got a call. I respond, but I didn't. And this is when the guy chimes in, and he says, "That was me. I think there's somebody smoking weed next to me, and this stupid worker's not doing anything about it." So the cops go up, they speak to the guests that I've already spoken to, and they come back down. I ask them if they found anything. Of course they didn't. If they need me to sign something, they don't, and I apologize for the guests wasting their time. And here's my petty revenge. One of the things we have guests sign is a paper saying that if they cause a disturbance to other guests, we reserve the right to ask them to leave. This includes loud noises, verbal or physical harassment, and basically anything we feel that violates the safety or well-being of another guest. So I asked the officers to stick around for a minute. I call the guest who had called them, and I inform him that he's violated our disturbance policy and he needs to leave right now. And the thing is, he had just checked in to his 4-night stay. Of course, the guy fights it. He starts yelling at me over the phone saying he refuses to leave. So I asked the officers to accompany me up to the room, and together we walk this guy out of my hotel. He should have just listened to me in the first place. Yeah, not only was that petty on OP's part to boot the guy, but that was totally just deserved. Like, maybe let hotel staff handle things, sir, and hopefully the guy learned a lesson. And seriously, it's just so much sweeter knowing that he was kicked out on his first night there. And guys, this next post, a group of Karens learn that calling the cops doesn't always result in getting what you want. On a day I was off work, I was craving a sandwich at lunchtime on a hot day. I traveled to the nearest Subway and I got in line. As it's noontime, there were quite a few people in line, and as many places, they seemed understaffed. The young teenage girl was the only one to make sandwiches, while the manager was ringing up the orders and not helping with condiments. So while I was waiting in line at Subway with like 6 others, I was behind a group of 3 old ladies, the Karens of this story. While not the spitting image of most Karens, you could tell from how they talked with each other that they were the kind of women with resting bitch faces. So it came time to have their sandwiches made, and of course, every single one of them wanted a very custom sandwich. Not only that, it wasn't good enough. This meat's a little too much. I want it toasted. That's too much. There's not enough of this. I want to switch the bread, so on and so on. It was annoying as the one girl tried to keep up, but she was getting frustrated and stressed. This is when the manager steps over trying to help, but with these women, they were not happy with anything. After 15 minutes of making each of the ladies' sandwiches, it finally came time to pay. Down to the register they went as my meatball sub was quickly made and passed down. I'm just plain bread, meat, and sauce, and a little ranch, so I waited behind them. The manager rings up the orders, and when the total came out to around $30-ish, they of course lose it again. Now, I'm not saying they started to squeal, but they were complaining. They were saying stuff like, "We waited forever to be served, and you two couldn't even make a sandwich. We want it for free," they whined. I was fed up with it, and after it continued for a few minutes, I stepped up and I said I would take the sandwiches and add them to mine. The old crows grinned and they thought they had one. I paid for the 4 sandwiches and I added my drinks and chips. After my card was approved and I was handed my receipt, I picked up my newly 4-baht sandwiches and got my drink. As I was paying, the old ladies went to sit at a table. After getting my drink, I head to the door to leave with my food in hand, to which one of the Karens says, "Excuse me, but you have our food still. Are you not gonna bring it to us?" With my receipt in hand, I hold it up and I say, "Nope, I paid my money from my food and I'll take them back to work." As I headed to the door, the old bitches get up and they chase me out the door, which I didn't mind. The staff had enough of them and I can take some abuse from crazies. They screamed at me saying, "You need to give us our food or we will call the cops and have you arrested." Now I knew this was dumb, but as I said, nothing better on a day off. So I told them, please be my guest. I assure you, they won't be doing anything about this. One of them starts to pull out a phone and call, while the others began telling me how I must love stealing food from old ladies, and how they know this person or that person, and I'll be in jail for a really long time. Well, they called the cops, and I just stood there not saying a word, which is hard to do while being belittled, but I didn't care at this point. Soon enough, a few units pulled in, and as they got out, a look of confusion crossed their face. The officer says, are you the guy they called about because you matched the description?" I respond, "Yes, I am. What did they call in on me?" The officer tells me, you stole their sandwiches and then demanded money from them. I respond, "Well, look into it. You can go inside and ask the clerk and the manager who paid for these sandwiches, and then look at this receipt." One officer walked inside and they spoke with the store manager and then watched the video while the other listened to these women insinuate that I took food from them. The shock was priceless once the other officer came out and confirmed I had paid for these sandwiches, and the store also wanted these 3 trespassed for a disturbance. The officers told me I was free to leave, but instead, I walked right back into Subway. I sat down in front of the window and I unwrapped one of their sandwiches and started eating. The manager even brought me a free cookie while the 3 women just stood outside arguing with these officers. They ended up being banned and they left with an even more sour look on their face. Seriously, what a move that was. And you don't need to be there to know that those women probably lost their minds when the cops let OP go. That said, who's taking notes and keeping that move to use on a nasty complaining Karen? And this person says, I was at Dairy Queen grabbing lunch one day. This gentleman ahead of me in line orders a fairly complex order with modifications and extras. I get to the till and place my quite simple order. I get my number and wait. They were absolutely swamped, but I had nowhere else to be, so it wasn't a big deal. Well, Mr. Big Order from before me was getting impatient. They call out my number and I start making my way to the counter. But Mr. Big Order barges his way to the counter. He snatches my bag and he storms out the door. The employee stands there dumbfounded. She waves me up to the till and she says, "That gentleman just stormed off with your order. Here's his if you want it." It's an Angus burger with an upgrade to onion rings and a couple of wraps. It's yours if you want it, or we can remake your order. So yeah, thanks for the approximate $15 upgrade for my lunch that day, you impatient a-hole. This next Karen discriminates against OP, and it's the worst mistake ever, guys. So long story short, my business didn't work out, and I took a job as a server for some extra cash. I like my job, my coworkers, and my managers, all except for one who, let's call her Sherry. Now, Sherry is an uber Christian, which is fine, to each their own. We had a fantastic working relationship, that is, until she found out that I was a practicing pagan. Since then, not only has she hated me, but she's been effing with me. She's giving me the worst sections, and she's not letting me off when I'm scheduled. She would also do stuff like tell others who work there that I'm a witch, that I'm a Satan worshiper. And the thing is, I don't even believe in Satan, let alone worship him. You know, the petty stuff, but whatever. I just let it go until last Sunday. I was scheduled to be off at 9 o'clock, but at 8:50, she sits me with a 6-top table. Now keep in mind, there are girls who are closers that should have gotten these tables. My kid was due to be off work across the street at 9:30, so I ask one of the closers if they want the table. They do, and I say, that's great, and I go about my business doing my side work. I finish up and get the required signatures of the closers and then head to the office to ask Sherry to walk me out, as we have to be walked out and frisked by a manager when we leave, as that's her stupid rules. She just smirks at me and says, "Well, let's go take a look at your section, shall we?" Which is okay. I've had my work checked, so whatever. And then she starts nitpicking. Where the salt goes, how the sugars are wrong, how I left a streak here and there on the table, stuff that none of the other managers care about. She then gives me that same smug look and she tells me I can't leave, that I have to clean the table that had the 6-top, that I was assigned that table, which is completely counter to the usual procedure. If you're the last one to wait a table at close, you are to clean the tables and fill the salt, the sugar, and sweep, regardless if the table's in your section. She's literally screaming at me with customers listening. At this point, I've had enough. I tell her that I feel like she's effing with me, and she's discriminating against me. And her response is, no, I'm not. I'm sorry you feel that way. You're so sensitive. I say to her, you don't care that I feel you're discriminating against me? And Sherry replies, nope, I don't. She then taunts me and she says, go ahead and call corporate. because everyone there loves her and nobody can touch her. At least 5 other people hear this. So feeling super petty and not even caring if I get fired or not, I think, well, okay then. The next day, I call the GM and I explain the situation and he's appalled. I tell him that I'm calling corporate and letting him know as a courtesy. He says he understands, so I call corporate. They're of course furious and concerned about potential litigation. In short, Sherry was toast. They let her go almost immediately. So remember kids, religious discrimination will get you fired, so don't be an a-hole. Once again, another example of justice served. And I'm glad to know that she was fired because there are so many nasty bosses out there that treat workers like garbage and are still employed. With that said though, the part about Sherry having to frisk workers every single day before their shift ends, like something about that has got to be a huge no-no in the workplace, right? When I was a university student, I worked in a little supermarket for over a year. I was 19 years old at the time, and since UK minimum wages are age-based, I was making very, very little. We had a really complicated machine for printing and cashing lottery tickets, and any corrections and refunds had to be signed off by the manager who was never around when we needed him. Cashing one ticket alone took something like 15 steps. It was wild. So for the first few weeks, I was quite slow at it in order to avoid making any mistakes. Well, on my second day there, this one old guy turns up. And in addition to some food, he wanted a few lottery tickets. He didn't seem to appreciate my lack of speed, and he leans in to about 8 inches away from my face, and he screams at me, "Yes!" when I tried to check if the numbers I was about to print off were correct. In retrospect, it really wasn't that big of a deal, but I was young and very small, so his screaming and towering over me was enough to make me feel upset and afraid. He looked very pleased with himself for making this young girl who's earning a few pounds an hour tremble with fear. That day, I cried in the employee bathrooms for the very first time. The job was not so great, so I was brought to tears by customers a few more times during my time there. But I was broke and a fast learner, so I was always available for overtime. I end up working 45 to 55 hours a week, and the guy turned out to be a regular, which meant that he absolutely knew that I was new, and I got to serve him often over the next year or so. I also got the hang of things, and I did pretty much everything else there, from training others, to keeping the fridge's temperature log, to ordering stock, logging and cleaning waste, to reducing items which had reached their sell-by date. Well, one benefit was I learned a few things about this miser who had screamed at me, like how nasty he was to everybody working there, especially the younger ladies, how he was retired and seemingly not very well off, and how he appeared to keep track of food sell-by dates, and he would regularly turn up soon after a certain meat-based item had been reduced for the final time. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with being old or on a budget, but it's always a bad idea to scream at people just because you're having a bad day and they're not allowed to defend themselves, especially the ones who handle your food. The other benefit was that because I was working there full time, I was the one serving him 99% of the time, which gave me ample opportunities to deliver my petty revenge. And it was gonna be a slow burn, like cooking a frog, as they say. Being a broke university student, I figured that I could both stick it to him and save myself a bit of money, since food price reductions stacked with my employee discount. The guy never screamed at me again, but for 10 months, I hid all of his nearly expired favorites behind the dairy items, and I purchased them for myself once he'd left in a huff after finding them gone. I didn't even care for sausages all that much, but I regularly ate something called toad in a hole out of sheer spite. He got visibly more and more upset over time because the other shoppers had seemingly caught on to his strategy. I always nodded sympathetically, saying, "Sorry, we've sold the last ones, maybe try again later in the week." I actually rather like Toad in a Hole now, and I have it as a special revenge treat. It reminds me of the time that I cooked a frog for nearly a year. Don't scream at people who handle your food. So my area has a problem with porch pirates, and the cops are thoroughly useless. Your camera isn't good enough to prove the thief's identity. The stolen package wasn't valuable enough. There's always some excuse for letting it go. At least one lives in my apartment complex, but management can't even make a case for eviction without the cops being willing to at least say, "Yes, that's our suspect." So the problem only seems to get worse and worse every week. Today, I got hit again. It was a $5 package of sewing supplies. It was left on my doorstep with photo proof, but by the time I got there, it was gone. Now, I'm sitting here in the middle of a crisis, making a point to not go out to a store for anything I can pay cheaper online for, and some idiot saw that as a golden opportunity for free stuff. So I'm just sitting here thinking, well, gee, that's rather rude. But I wasn't going to dwell on this. I had chores to do, namely, my cat's litter boxes needed cleaning. So I got an empty mailing box and I got to work. But there wasn't really enough of it to fill the box. So I start thinking, do we have anything else similarly awful around here? And that's when I found my jar of failed sourdough starter. I didn't close it well enough, and a couple of bugs got in, and predictability ensued from there. I'd been dreading cleaning that jar out for months. I had it sealed up to kill the bugs and to keep it from smelling, and I had considered throwing it out altogether, but it was a nice jar, so I didn't want to do that. I finally decided to get it over with and clean it out. The jar's in the dishwasher as we speak, and for the contents, well, they're finally going to good use. And just to make it very clear how I felt about this, I left a little note with an applicable quote. The quote being, "Keep the change, you filthy animal." I put some plastic wrap over the box on top of everything to keep the spoiled bread juice from soaking through the box when I flipped it back over. I left the note in there, and here it is, the first of possibly many lovely gifts for my neighbors. Sadly, but also fortunately, there's no way to share the smell online. So I'm just gonna say that I've been in porta potties that smelled way better than this end result. Sure enough, the package is gone. This is the classic story about that stupid a-hole who steals food from the work fridge. And this happened about 10 years ago. At least twice a week, my homemade lunch would disappear from the fridge. The thief had the decency to not take the box, which I found empty or almost empty every single time. I was new, and I quickly discovered by talking to my colleagues that it was the work of this one jerk with whom I obviously didn't get along with. He wasn't new to this, but the management never did anything. To which I thought, fine, I'm a petty person and I have time to spare. So I started bringing decoy lunches that I put in the fridge, and I would eat a sandwich that didn't need to be refrigerated. After 2 weeks, I start talking to everyone, including him, about this new wellness method I discovered and I was following to the letter. I told him that I was collecting my menstrual blood to eat it. I even showed a video on my phone where I was preparing the meal and emptying my menstrual cup into it. Now that said, I am well aware of the severe risks associated with getting into contact with someone else's blood. So rest assured knowing that was not true. I just wanted to get him to believe it. It is possible, however, that he ate my feet's dead skin. Anyway, he took a week off after that, and our shared fridge became a safe space to store food again. Honestly, I can never get enough of food thieves getting taught lessons because you guys know my thoughts on that. If it's not your food, don't eat it. And the guy getting mortified brings a smile to my face. And this person adds a similar story. They say, This is not a complicated story. My old roommate used to eat my food and drinks. Despite having several conversations about boundaries and not being an a-hole, nothing changed. So I faked being sick for 2 days over the weekend when he was home. I did stuff like drank directly out of the OJ container. I would lick the edge of the pickle jar before putting the top back on when some pickle juice ran over. I stuck my bare finger in the peanut butter, and I used my finger to put cream cheese on a bagel. I made extra sure that he noticed all of it. On Sunday, he broke and he asked me if I always handled food like that. I told him I thought it was dumb to use utensils when I'm the only one eating my food. Not only did that end my food being stolen, but he suggested that we each have our own drawers and shelves in the fridge to prevent confusion. I win. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/PettyRevenge. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where psycho Karen bosses are making up stupid rules, and they're getting taught lessons they won't ever forget. So go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.